Let's get started. Alright, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. In the name of Allah, the Compassionate, the Merciful. So, how is the homework going along? The short answers. Going better? Yeah? Better? Alhamdulillah. Okay, good. How long it took you to complete? 90 hours. So what do you think total number of hours? 3, 2? 2 to 3 hours? Okay. Jamie? 2.5 hours? Layla? Probably less than that? Okay, good, alhamdulillah.
Sometimes there's more questions.
Right. Yeah, I mean this last week, this previous week. But how long did it take you?
I just log in and I just kind of do it. Like, I just keep coming back to it.
Okay, so what would you say in terms of length of time? 2.5. Okay, good. So maybe about the same?
I also do it in parts,
Yeah,
but I would say like about 8 hours.
okay.
I listen to the lecture again.
Okay, good. No, that's good. As long as it's not exceeding 8 hours, then you're fine. All right. So, if it's exceeding 8, then you're exceeding the Carnegie standard, right? Then we have to reduce the number of questions for you. But, inshallah, as long as it's not, we're good. Alhamdulillah. Yes. Yes. Okay. So there was a question about. And all the other slaves became Muslim. When it came to prayer, all of them were praying in the same line. There were no divisions of someone has to stand in the back, and another person is going to stand in the front, and then eventually after 5 years, Bilal can move from the third line to the second line, because he's black or something like that. None of that happened, right? So this was something that was eliminated immediately. Other thing, and like obviously worshipping idols, was eliminated immediately. So for example, if someone is a Muslim, you cannot say, okay, well, you know what, right now, you can keep your idol, but you don't bow down to it. And then after a few years, once you stop bowing down to your idol, stop giving it food. And then after a few years, now you stop giving it food, get rid of the idol, and you can only have a picture. And then from the picture, we eventually have to get rid of the picture. Like, that could have happened, but no. Idolatry was something that's non-compromisable, right? It has to be immediately removed completely. But there were some things which had to be removed, but gradually, because it took time for people to kind of digest it. Among the things that we've already covered in this class, what's one of the things that we learned was gradually prohibited over a period of time? Wine was one of them, right? And we saw what Aisha said, right? This was this class, right? Aisha said about if the first verse prohibited was wine, then this is what would have happened, right? So that shows gradual prohibition as well. Another thing that was gradually prohibited was interest. So, the consumption of interest was something that was gradually prohibited. And many other things. So the thing is, knowing when, so the verses which started to initiate the prohibition of alcohol, as an example, knowing kind of when they were gives us a timeline of what were the stages involved in gradually prohibiting wine. So I'll give you like a hint at what's coming. So one of the verses, it says, don't pray, basically says, don't pray when you're drunk. It didn't say don't drink, it says don't pray when you're intoxicated. That was before the prohibition of alcohol. Then comes the prohibition of alcohol, you basically don't drink at all. So now you got, let's say, 2 verses here. Knowing that one verse was revealed before the other one is very, very important to understand how this process took place. Because there's no process if you don't have any order, right? So if you didn't know which one which one came first, it's not chronological necessarily in the Qur'an. So the chronological order of the Qur'an is not the order of revelation of the Qur'an. So it's important to know which one came first, and it's important to know kind of around what period was this. Was it early Medina, late Medina? When was alcohol prohibited? Was it early Meccan, late Meccan, early Medinan, late Medinan, all of that. So we'll look into that in a little bit more detail in another session, but that just gives you an understanding of, if you want to understand which laws gradually developed in Islam, then we understand that. Like for example, 5 prayers a day. So the 5 prayers were not initiated from the beginning of Islam. Yet, we do find that prayer was established in the beginning of Islam. So you find very early verses telling the Prophet to stand up for prayer. And the other companions, they're also standing up with the Prophet and they're praying very long nights. But there were no 5 prayers at that time. So when we find out that, okay, there's 5 prayers, knowing when the different prayers are kind of coming in, or knowing which verses are talking about the guarding your prayers, the salawat, meaning the 5 prayers, that was not speaking about the early revelation. So that helps us to get an understanding of the gradual introduction of certain rules or prohibitions in the history of Islam. Right, so that's important to know. The third thing that's important to know is it gives us some insight into the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and into the mission of Islam over the 23 years of its history. Right? So it gives us some chronological account of events. Right? And it shows us how the focus developed. Very similar to what Aisha was saying. What was Aisha saying? She's saying the beliefs came first, and then the development of piety and righteousness and God consciousness, that was instilled first, and then the rulings came later. So what you find is, you find kind of like a timeline, and the Qur'an kind of gives you a timeline when you know which verses are kind of along which timeline, that belief comes first. Believe in the Prophet, believe in the Day of Judgment, believe that there's another life. Then comes afterwards, then the laws start to be introduced. And then later on, more laws come, family laws come, and also fighting takes place. So knowing that this is kind of the timeline, it gives us an understanding of how Islam unveiled itself in history. And that's important to know, because sometimes you relive certain historical circumstances which require you to know that, so that you can apply it in a similar way. So for example, if Islam is completely fresh, brand new in some place, it's just been introduced into an area, there's almost no Muslims there, you look at the timeline, you say, okay, what should we focus on? You realize, hey, let's focus on the things that we're focused on in the beginning, so you at least have an understanding of, you don't have to relive the 23-year timeline. All right, that's obviously not the case. But what's going to happen is you get an understanding of what takes precedence and priority, and what did Allah prioritize, so we can prioritize that in our own schedule. Okay. Number 4, it helps people understand how to call other people to Islam, and it helps to establish Islam in a community. So kind of what we just talked about, right? So even when you're calling other people, or when someone comes into Islam, it helps you understand that where are your priorities? What were the priorities of the believers at that time, and how, how things evolved over time. So it helps us to understand that as well. Okay, any questions? Repeating, and 1 second. It's working now? Good. Streaming computer crash. In regards to previous question. Yes. So Frank is asking, in regards to my previous question, can we reduce the amount of questions? Maybe 10 to 12 per class. I know this is not... Okay, somebody... Okay. So I've gotten this request a lot. But if you're doing it in 2 hours, it's pretty good. So, is anyone like direly need it to be reduced? Yes. Okay, I tell you what, I'll think about it this weekend, and I'll do istikhara, and I'll make a decision, inshallah. This is a big decision. Huh? Make my shura with you? Okay, what do you think? Why should we reduce the number of questions?
Because sometimes when we have less, we can learn better.
Mm.
Like for me, when I have a lot of questions, I like to enjoy what I'm learning. I
Mm.
don't want to just like finish them.
Mm-hmm. You didn't take as much. Okay.
I got to this point, I was like, oh my gosh, I still have 7. And then I started to just,
So the question that I have, the thing that I have is, look, how much time are we supposed to, how much time are you supposed to be spending outside of class? Like I said, there's no fixed, clear definition. Okay, Carnegie system officially says 8 hours, and I know no one, almost no one in any university spends 8 hours on every class outside of class. It just does not happen. So what is fair? We want to keep a good standard, but we don't want to overburden you at the same time.
I think it flows very well the way the question is set up.
Mm.
Fit the whole document. There's no extra questions. I think it's not
Okay. Okay. Your thoughts?
I was gonna say, talked to you before, splitting it up in different quizzes.
Mm.
So therefore, feel like you accomplished one. It's like a milestone to the next one.
So you can split over 3 days, 3 sections for 3 days, for
It's
example.
in one document. I was doing the homework.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, I have 10 questions. So I'm going down, 7,
Mm.
8, 10. What? There's 11? I didn't expect there to be more. And in my mind, I was like, man, I got 2 or 3 hours for these 10 questions. And then there's 15. I was like, oh man, I didn't know there was that many.
How many days do you split your exams over generally?
2 or 3 days.
2, 3? Who splits? Who does one day, like just knock it out in one shot? One shot? One shot? One shot? If we split it up, like Kenny's saying, would you just do both of them in the same day anyways?
So I prefer that what we did last time, because we also had to engage a lot more than just reading the document and answering questions.
Mm.
I enjoyed that.
You enjoyed what?
I enjoyed that a lot, and I think my teacher enjoyed it also.
Which one? The previous time, you're saying?
Yeah, like whenever all the last terms or the term before,
Oh.
we had long essay questions.
Right,
that
right.
really put a lot of effort into it.
Mm.
So that was effective. But this is effective in learning the subject.
Right, right, right.
That was more effective in us being able to express our.
Right, right.
So I understand where you're.
That's the thing. So that's the balance between focusing on the subject and like expressing your own self. So we could have an extra essay due at the end on the finals if you like. We can so, yeah, an optional one for Sahib, inshallah. Alhamdulillah. Yeah, okay. Let me think about it. So let's say if I give you 2 options. Option 1 is we cut a few questions, but those questions that I cut will appear on the final and they'll be brand new. Or I give you all the questions and you're going to see the exact same questions on the final. So you kind of were prepared for them already. Yeah. Option 2, that give you all of them and let the same ones come on the final. Okay. So I'm debating that still. I'm still thinking about that. So there may be a section that is and a section that's not, most likely, inshallah. So okay. Any comment? On 1 or 2? Give you all the questions and repeat them on the final, or cut some questions and give you the new ones that I cut and put them straight on the final that you've never seen before. The new questions on the final is number 1. Number 2? Okay. Inshallah. Because the thing is, I want to make sure, here's what's going to happen. The issue is, okay, so Omar's saying the same thing. The issue is this. If I give you 20 questions, you're going to solidify the material every week on all those 20 questions. If I give you 10, right, and I don't give you those on the final, you're going to have half the material solidified. Right? It's forced prioritization, right? Like if you're like going to super study every single section, you have it all down. But if not, then this forces you to go and make sure that you have this part down. That's the reason why I'm giving you these questions, pretty much. It's literally in order, and it's just what you need to like. It's like a review for your reading, basically. So inshallah, I'll think about how it goes. Inshallah, I'll let you know soon. You'll find out as soon as the next quiz is posted. Inshallah, what my decision was. Inshallah. Okay. So hopefully, if it gets overburdening, though, you let me know. So if you're exceeding, I think it's fair to say, if it's exceeding 4 hours outside of class to do the exam, it's a lot. And sorry, exceeding 4 meaning total of 4, everything. That includes reading before class, if you read before class. If you had the notes before class, then you could read before class. Reading before class, reading after class, double checking the video, and answering the questions. If it exceeds 4 hours total outside of class, then I'll make an adjustment for sure. All right, so if half the students are saying we're exceeding 4 hours outside of class, I'll definitely make an adjustment. Otherwise, I'll think about making an adjustment. Does that sound fair? I hope so. Yeah. Class is 3 hours long. Technically, it's supposed to be a fourth hour of class, right? So 4 hours of class, supposed to be 8 hours outside of class. So it's supposed to be 4 plus 8 is 12. So I'm saying if it's 4 plus 4, if you're exceeding 4 plus 4, then I'll have mercy on you, you know. So, but if you're not exceeding 4 plus 4, then can I still have mercy? Inshallah. Inshallah, I will think about it then, inshallah. So, huh? Ameen, jazakumullah khair. So, they're up. They were up like a little while ago. Yeah, they were up a little while ago. But yeah, they're up now, inshallah. All right, so that answers Frank's question. We got a lot of salams coming in online, mashallah. Let's see, we have another question. I know this isn't pertinent to the class right now, but a Christian woman asked me for a copy of the Qur'an or suggestion to a translation. Okay. Yes, the Oxford translation of the Qur'an is a good translation. It's probably one of the best by Abdul Halim. How can we determine alcohol in food nowadays? I've come across different answers. Does alcohol really disintegrate into food the way we can consume it? So this is not exactly related to this class. We're going to cover it in Islamic Law 1. Since I think the person asking is in that class, I won't answer this question right now. For one class, takes at least 2 plus hours of class. If you add that up for someone else 4 class, that's a lot. Agreed. May Allah give you strength, inshallah. With all due respect, it's easier for the full-time job and drive 2 hours to get to class. Yes. Some of the questions were in quiz 2, not covered in lecture 2. Yes. So I know that. So I mentioned that already at the beginning of class. The last 2 questions in quiz 2 for this class were not covered in lecture 2. So we're going to cut those out and you won't be penalized for those. And if you answered them, good job. But we're still going to cut them out anyways, inshallah. I will. No, they're going to be asked again. Yeah, they're going to come again, inshallah. Okay, any other questions about what we just covered so far? About the benefits of knowing these things? Makkah and Medina revelations, classification of it. Or all the question that you had, you forgot because we were talking about adjusting the quiz. I can't even remember this question. Go ahead.
Why do you think that idolatry got immediately removed instead of gradually? Not specific idolatry, but the 2 that you mentioned. Not idolatry, but the belief in one God. Why was it something that was not gradual?
So why would, right.
If the pagan gods were in that society, it's probably ingrained in their heart.
That's the most difficult thing for them to give up. Right. So the question is, why wasn't idolatry gradually removed rather than removed all at once? Like, why wasn't there some gradual prohibition on idols or idol worship or something like that? Since that was the thing that was the most deep-rooted in their hearts and they needed to kind of get away from it over a period of time. The reason why it wasn't gradual is because that's the absolute core of Islam. Like there's absolutely nothing more important, and that's the biggest test. That's pretty much what entails accepting Islam from not accepting Islam. So that's probably one aspect of it, and the second aspect of it is probably that those people who wanted or thought that a gradual prohibition would somehow help them, it's a delusion. So like it wouldn't actually help them, because that would be part of their addiction to the idolatry that they're not getting out of it, right? So it wouldn't have helped them anyways. It's like cold turkey was the only way to get them out of this. Kind of like there'll be too many relapses, kind of like a coke addict or something like that, you know, depending on what type of drug it is. Some of them, they require you to completely give it up, otherwise it's just going to keep staying in your system. So idolatry is probably one of those things. So it's actually even for the good of those people. Yeah.
Because I was thinking that belief in one God it's more easy to rationalize that there is one God instead of many.
Mm.
And with wine and other addictions, it's more of an appetitive bodily thing. It's harder to give up, so that's why it's gradual. That's what I was thinking.
That's a good explanation, actually. Yeah. So the actions and like wine and something that's appetitive,
Makes sense, 'cause a lot of Christians were like, oh,
it's harder. Yeah.
I'm gonna convert to Islam just right away. They were told the message and they're like, oh, I believe it.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
was that easy?
Yeah. And that's the case that I've noticed with many new Muslims too. Many people are very attracted to Islam and they're really willing to accept Islam immediately. But then doing, you know, waking up for Fajr and praying the 5 prayers, and even Muslims, you know, people who grew up Muslim, that's the most difficult challenge for them, right? So that's a good point you bring up. Yeah, alhamdulillah. Any other questions?
I'm just going to say, I think the practice of idolatry is more following desires than believing that that idol is for the person who practices it. Is it something that they can use the idol to just follow whatever they want to do? Use it as a scapegoat.
Use the idol as a scapegoat to do whatever they want to do. Yeah, that's probably another thing. Yeah. Anything else? Yes. Yes. So, how do you identify which one of the 12 surahs which have different opinions on them? Well, you don't identify them. So, in the sense that you choose an opinion. So you choose an opinion, and usually you're not supposed to choose an opinion until you reach the level where you're qualified to choose an opinion. Right? So in the meantime, you just study kind of both opinions. So it's kind of like studying, I don't know, studying the original cause of World War II. Like what really led to World War II? So there's like this opinion and this opinion and this opinion. If you're not a specialist in history, you're not firm on one opinion. You kind of like look at them and you say, okay, that's interesting, but you wouldn't really need to know. Like if that's not like your field, you don't really absolutely need to know, because you're not going into in-depth analysis of it anyways. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, it's coming in the next section, inshallah. Remind me before the end of class, inshallah. Anything else? Okay, then let's move on to week 3's material. So we're going to be covering the causes of revelation. This is something in Arabic which is known as the sabab an-nuzul or asbab an-nuzul, which means the cause of the revelation of certain verses. So what does it mean? What's the definition of this? So basically, when you look at the verses in the Qur'an, there are some verses where there was an incident that took place, and this incident is the direct cause of the revelation of that verse. Okay? So for example, let's take chapter 58, okay? Surah Al-Mujadila. The verse says, "Certainly Allah has heard the speech of the one who argues with you," speaking to the Prophet. Allah has heard the speech of the one who argues with you concerning her husband and directs her complaint to Allah. So what's being said in this verse here is that Allah is saying in the Qur'an, in the first verse of this surah, that Allah has heard the lady, the one who's complaining with you, O Prophet. So there's a lady who came and she complained to you and she argued with you about her husband. And then she started directing her complaint to Allah because you didn't resolve the issue. So she started complaining to Allah, "Oh Allah, this is what's happening with my husband. Oh Allah, help me." So Allah's response is saying that he's heard the complaint and he's saying that she was arguing with you and now she's directing the complaint to me. And then it says, and Allah hears your dialogue. Indeed, Allah is hearing and seeing. So Allah is revealing in this verse, basically saying in a third person way that Allah has heard exactly this. Allah has witnessed all of this. He heard the argument, He acknowledged the argument, and now He's going to say something about it. So this is what this verse is about. So this incident or this verse that's revealed is in direct response to an incident that happened. What was the incident in history that happened? A woman came to the Prophet, and we know from historical sources that her name was Khawla. So she goes to the Prophet and she's complaining about her husband and saying, Messenger of Allah, my husband does this. And the Prophet is, sitting there listening and is telling her, okay, be patient. And then she's like, be patient, So then she complains to Allah, oh Allah, do something for me. So this verse is revealed immediately after the incident, right? After a little while after this incident. And you can tell from the context that it's revealed directly in response to that incident that took place. So this verse is a good example of what's called the cause of revelation of this verse. What caused the revelation of this verse? It's very clear from the context and from the verse itself that the dispute and the argument, or basically the complaint that this woman had about her husband, was the cause of this, right? So, and the reason for the dispute was the husband. So, husband is the indirect cause. The dispute or the conversation that this Khawla had with the Prophet is the direct cause of the revelation. Okay, so what we understand is that this is just one example. There are a number of verses throughout the Qur'an that have a cause of revelation, and it's important to know these causes. Now, do most verses have a specific cause? The answer is no. Most verses don't have a specific cause. So for example, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, praise belongs to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the Lord of the worlds. So from Surah Al-Fatiha, there's no specific cause of revelation. There's no incident that happened and then all of a sudden this was revealed. At least we can't tell from the context here, nor is there anything historical that specifically says that this was revealed on this particular incident that took place. You look at any other verse, random verse in the Qur'an, قُلْ هُوَ اللَّهُ أَحَدٌ, say He is Allah, the One. There's no specific context or something like that. But you go to other things, تَبَّتْ يَدَا أَبِي لَهَبٍ وَتَبٍ, may the two hands of Abu Lahab perish, and may he perish, may he be destroyed as well. So this one actually has a context. So if you go back to even the verses that some of them have a context, some of them don't. They all have a context, or some have more of a context, some have a cause, and some don't have a cause. The vast majority do not have a direct cause. Okay? So that means, in one sense, it's easier for us to understand the Qur'an because we don't need to know that many, the background of so many verses. But some verses, you need to know the background of them, of the cause, otherwise you may not understand it correctly. So this is one example, okay? So most verses don't have a particular cause. Why? Why do you think most verses don't have a particular cause? But this one does. Like this woman comes, complains, the verse is revealed on that occasion. Why isn't the most of the Qur'an like that? Without plagiarizing from my notes and giving the direct answer. Yes. Exactly. So the message becomes universal. So it's universally applicable and it's a lot more general. So it's going to fulfill the purpose of the Qur'an. The purpose of the Qur'an is to be general for every single person. But then there's also specific instances where Allah wanted it to be documented and He wanted it to be revealed in that, in this context. So that's why most verses do not have a particular incident that caused the revelation of certain verses. Even if the verses relate to that incident, there's not a direct incident that happened, right? Many verses were revealed for the circumstances that the Muslims were going through. So the thing is, we talked about this before, most of the verses, the reason why it's being revealed over 23 years is because it's being revealed for the Muslim community or for the Prophet or for someone going through something else, but they did not have to be in response to a specific incident. So for example, when the stories of the Prophets were revealed, like the stories of Prophet Nuh and Prophet Ibrahim and the persecution that the Prophets went through, when it was being revealed, it's comforting the believers that we're not the only people who went through difficulty. There's victory after, victory comes after difficulty and hardship and all of that stuff. But it's not directly talking about their incident. So yes, there's a context to when it was revealed and why it was revealed at that time, but there's a difference between having a verse having a context and a verse having a direct cause. Two different things. There's an indirect cause, you can say, and there's a direct cause. So the causes of revelation that we're talking about right now is a direct cause, meaning this is directly in response to something that just happened and is being revealed, addressing that directly on the spot. On the spot meaning like either the same day or the next day or the same week or something along those lines. Okay? So, we're analyzing the Qur'an. We're going through and looking at all the different verses in the Qur'an, and we're trying to figure out which verses have a specific direct cause. So we need certain conditions. Right? So, where are the conditions? We're not there yet. So certain conditions. Condition number one, in order to define whether or not something is a cause, a direct cause of revelation, the first condition is that it must be in response to a specific incident. There's got to be either an event that took place, a question that happened, or something like that. This example of a woman complaining to the Prophet and then complaining to Allah is a perfect example. It mentions woman, so it's a person, it's a specific person, and there's an incident where something happened and the verse is directly addressing that incident. And it's very, very clear from the wording that it's addressing that incident. So that's condition number one. The second, it must be the direct cause of revelation. It cannot go back and refer to that incident that took place like 10 years back. So if there's an incident, for example, Surah Al-Fil, أَلَمْ تَرَ كَيْفَ فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِأَصْحَابِ الْفِيلِ, have you not seen how your Lord dealt with the people of the elephant? So there was an elephant incident that happened decades earlier, and the Qur'an is talking about that incident that happened. But it's talking about it, but the verses are not revealed in response to the incident that took place. Incident happened a long time ago and it's just referring back to it. So condition number two, it must be the direct cause. The incident must be the direct cause of the verses being revealed. Okay. And then condition number three, which is kind of in the same category, it must have occurred slightly before. So if there is a verse revealed, and then right after the verse is revealed, an incident happens that seems to match exactly what the verse is talking about. Let's say the verse about alcohol, we were just talking about alcohol, right? It says, don't approach prayer when you're intoxicated. The verse comes down, the verse is recited, all the companions learn the verse, and then all of a sudden, 1 week later, or the next day, one companion, he gets intoxicated, and then he goes to pray, and he messes up his prayer. That verse cannot be said to be a cause of, that incident cannot be the cause of revelation of that verse, because it happened after. It has to happen before, and very, near, near in time, right before that. Right? So, we talked about the elephant incident as an example. A prophecy would not count either. So for example, there's a verse in the Qur'an, chapter 54, verse 45, it says, the group will flee and they will show their backs. So it's saying that you're going to be victorious in battle. So telling the Muslims there's going to be an army against you, and they will run away and they will show their backs, meaning they're going to run away. So you're going to be victorious because they're retreating. So this is a prophecy. You can't say that this was revealed in response to a particular battle because it didn't actually happen yet. It's talking about this what's gonna happen in the future. So it's not referring to prophecies or predictions or anything like that. Okay? Questions? Yes. That's exactly what we're going to cover in about half of today's class, inshallah.
That's true, I think Dr. Lynn, because he owned land, I think that he got understanding that after the
We're going to cover how you know and why there's different stories, and we're going to clarify this, inshallah, the rest of this class. Okay, let's take a break. It is 7:53. We will come back at 8:03, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, we finished the definition of the cause of revelation. So that's kind of what it means. So it has to be the incident that was the direct cause, right? Very few verses have it, and it's got to be in reference to a specific incident that occurred kind of like right around that time, right before it. Yeah. Now, why is it important to know this? Right? Now, this is really, really important because many people misunderstand the Qur'an because they don't know this. Right? So there's a lot of benefits to knowing the cause. First of all, it will help you in understanding that verse that you're reading by giving it the correct historical context. Right? And the reality is we need to know the historical context of almost any document, of almost any book. You know, even if you're trying to read a story like, I don't know, Harry Potter or something like that, if you have no context of the genre of fiction, right, you'll misunderstand the book. So it's so easy for people to like read a book and they're like, oh, it makes sense, you can just read it on your own. That's because you live in that context. When you're divorced from that historical era, you're divorced from the context, there are no fictional stories, you've never heard of a tale of, I don't know what, there's dragons or something else in there, whatever is like fairies or something like that. Whatever that fictional genre is, you've never even heard of anything like that, right? All these, what are they, witches or something like that? I think they're like witches, right? Who cares?
Vampires.
Yeah, so
Vampires.
so I don't think they're vampires. but I know what they're not. What's that? No, I was talking about Harry Potter. What are they? Yeah, wizards. There you go, like wizards and magician. There you go. Okay, wizards, magicians, things like that, right? Like, let's say you don't know any of that context, right? And you wouldn't be able to read it properly. So that's what's going on with many people in the Quran. They have no context at all, like that there was a place called Arabia, right? People don't even know. They don't even know that there was a place called Arabia. They don't even know that there was a building like called the Kaaba in the middle of a city called Mecca. Like, if you don't know any of that at all, and you're like, what? There's a people known as Arabs? Like, what is that? All of a sudden you read a verse in the Quran and it says, this Quran is an Arabic Quran. You're like, what? There's like a language called Arabic or something like that? Or so you have to know some context. And the problem is that when people don't, they're very far from the context because they live in a culture that doesn't really care much about history, or that doesn't understand much about history, or that doesn't want to know much about history, or is skeptical about history, thinking that history is his story, like it's all something that has been modified and you cannot trust it at all, so everything is viewed with a skeptical eye. Then what happens is you will have people approaching the Qur'an or any other book by saying, we're going to give it our own spin and our own understanding. Like, it doesn't matter what it was meant to say. What matters is the value it has in my personal life and what I think of it, right? And it's funny because the American Constitution, there's actually a school of thought in law that interprets the Constitution this way, that they don't care what the original document was supposed to have meant. What matters is what I think it means today, as long as it fits within the framework, right? Which is, I'm not going to get into the legality of it, but that's interesting. But when it comes to the Qur'an, you want to know what the intention was, otherwise you're not going to be able to understand the book on its own terms. So that's why it's very important to know this section. So by knowing the cause of revelation of certain verses, it gives you that historical context. So one, historical context is important, and two, when a verse has a cause, if you don't know the cause, or at least something about the cause, you will completely miss the historical context. All right. The next thing, it helps to understand the gradual revelation of laws, like we just talked about, right? Like gradual prohibition of wine and things like that. And the next point is that it can be difficult, or it might even be impossible to understand what a verse is talking about if you don't understand the background cause. If it has a cause, or if it has a historical context, you may not understand the verse at all. Right? So some verses have historical context, some verses have a specific cause. So to give you an example of a verse which has a historical context that you may not understand it correctly if you didn't know the background, right? And this is so important because I've encountered so many Muslims who have this they have this idea that the Qur'an is a clear book. And the Qur'an says it is a clear book, kitabim mubin, right? And they quote verse after verse how the Qur'an is clear and it's understandable and it's easy to understand, and they quote verse and verse and verse, but their meaning of all of that is that we don't need any context, or we don't need any other books, we don't need any causes, we don't need any history. We can just open it and we can read it ourselves and we get 100% understanding. And we're not going to end up making any mistakes because it's so clear that it doesn't require any background understanding. This is a completely flawed concept. And this section that we're going to cover right now is going to show you why this is a flawed concept. Right? But most people who end up remaining in that mentality, they're not going to get out of that mentality because they won't make it to week 3 in a class like this. That's just the reality of what's going to happen. Sure? Sure. It's being recorded for you. You can take the video. But if you want to, Bismillah, you can, inshallah, no problem. So, so that's important, right? So, let's take a verse, okay? Here's a verse from the Quran. I'm going to open it up, actually, on the browser for you here. We're going to go to, so we're going to be going through a lot of verses today. Let's see if Chrome opens. Okay. What's your favorite Quran app to look up verses? Anyone have a nice one that they like? Quran Lite, that's an app, that's a phone app.
The USC.
The USC database, yeah, which has technically been transferred over to another one, but in their time they were amazing.
Yeah.
Qur'an Explorer is good too, yes. So let's try this one. It has a few bugs, this new version, but we're looking at verse 2, 158. Let's see if it comes. Yes, okay. إِنَّ الصَّفَا وَالْمَرْوَةَ مِنْ شَعَائِرِ اللَّهِ. Indeed, as-Safa and al-Marwa are among the symbols of Allah. So first of all, we need to know what Safa and Marwa are. Right? Otherwise, if you think Safa is the name of a woman and Marwa is another woman and they're both sisters, then you will not understand this verse at all. Right? So what are Safa and Marwa? They're mountains, right? So they're mountains in the city of Mecca, which are right next to the Kaaba. So it says Safa and Marwa are among the symbols or the signs of Allah, the holy symbols and signs of Allah. فَمَنْ حَجَّ الْبَيْتَ أَوْ اعْتَمَرَ فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ أَنْ يَطَّوَّفَ بِهِمَا. So it says, whoever makes Hajj to the house or performs Umrah, there is no blame upon him for walking between them. Okay, so let's just focus on this part of the verse. So it's saying whoever goes for Hajj. So what is Hajj? Hajj is the pilgrimage to Mecca that every Muslim should undertake once in their lifetime. If they can afford it and they're able to go, they have to go. Whoever performs pilgrimage of the house. So what is the house? Whose house? The house of Allah, the Kaaba, right? أو اعتمر, or makes Umrah. فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ. So لَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ means there's no blame on that person. أَن يَطَّوَّفَ بِهِمَا. If they make tawaf, meaning they go back and forth. So as they go back and forth between the mountains or the hills of Safa and Marwa, what does it say? La junaha alayh. There's no blame on that person. There's no sin on that person if they go back and forth between Safa and Marwa. So now what is this talking about? It's talking about Hajj and it's talking about Umrah. So Hajj is the pilgrimage that you go on once in a lifetime at least. And Umrah is the one where you go to Mecca and you walk around the Kaaba and you do some other things, right? And it's like a small pilgrimage. It's like a mini Hajj. You could do that at any time of the year. So now, obviously, we need to know that background to understand it. But now this part, all right? فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ. what does that mean? So when you study Islamic law, things are categorized into one of 5 categories. It's mandatory to do this, like praying 5 times. It's recommended to do this, like fasting on Mondays and Thursdays. It's permissible. It doesn't matter whether you do it or not, like itching yourself during prayer because you need to. If you itch yourself because you don't need to, then it's in the disliked category. Makruh, right? Disliked, something better to avoid. And then there's prohibited, like you don't eat pork. So there's generally like 5 categories, right, in Islamic law. So now if you read this verse and you see فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ, there's no blame for walking between Safa and Marwa, which category would you put this in? You're saying disliked? Permissible, right? That's what it seems. It seems it's in the mubah category, which means permissible, something which is allowed. So basically the verse seems to be saying there's no problem if you go back and forth. So if you're saying there's no problem in doing it, it's permissible. It's neither recommended, nor is it disliked, nor is it mandatory, nor is it forbidden. It's just, if you do it, it's fine. There's no problem. So what happened is that some people, if someone were to read this today, they would automatically say, well, of course, it's clear. When you go for Umrah, or when you go for Hajj, walking between Safa and Marwa, it's permissible. You do it, you don't do it, doesn't make any difference. Is it recommended? No. Do you have to do it? No. You know, you can do it if you want. So they would think it's in the middle category, where it doesn't matter if you do it or not. That's what the verse appears to be saying. But that's not what the verse is saying. So the verse has a context. So there was a companion by the name of Urwa ibn Zubair. Urwa ibn Zubair is the nephew of Aisha, who is the wife of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And this is in Bukhari and Muslim. It's an authentic hadith. So Urwa ibn Zubair was one of those companions who was very, very young, you know, when the Prophet, peace be upon him, passed away. So he goes and he's reading this verse, and his assumption was the same thing. He says that walking between Safa and Marwa, and remembering Allah and all of that, it's mubah, it's permissible. That's what his understanding was. And then he asked his aunt Aisha, who was the wife of the Prophet, one of the most learned companions out of all the companions. He says, you know, why do people keep doing this if they don't really have to do it? It's not important. Why is there so much emphasis on doing it? And she explained, she says, no, you're misunderstanding the verse. That's not what the verse means. What the verse means is that you have to know the history of what happened here. In the time of the Prophet, there used to be an idol on Safa, and there used to be an idol on Marwa. And it was well known by all the Muslims and the non-Muslims. So the non-Muslims, they used to perform pilgrimage as well. So they made Hajj. This is something that's known. It's also in the Qur'an that talks about how they would use to perform pilgrimage as well. So they used to be a ritual where they go around the Kaaba and they walk between Safa and Marwa. This was done by non-Muslims before Islam as well. And then it was done by Muslims afterwards. So what happened is that Aisha said there used to be an idol on each mountain. So now when the Muslims enter into Islam and they learn that, okay, we're supposed to continue doing the Hajj. Hajj is part of Islam too. Even though non-Muslims are doing it, it's actually part of what Prophet Ibrahim used to do. So what happens now is that some people started thinking that, hey, wait a minute, we can't do this because there's an idol there. There's an idol on Safa and there's an idol on Marwa. So how can we as Muslims, now that we're Muslims, we can't be doing what the people are doing because there were idols there. So there was a misunderstanding. The idols had been removed. Okay? There was a misunderstanding that some Muslims, they thought that maybe the idea of why Safa and Marwa were significant and important were because of the idols, because that's what they grew up believing. But the Qur'an comes now and clarifies to them that no, there is nothing wrong with you going between Safa and Marwa as you're supposed to do, which is something that's part of your Hajj and pilgrimage. So it's a response to a mentality that existed among the companions at that time. I know that's a lot to process. Did anyone understand that at all? Okay, alhamdulillah. So, to recap, imagine the companions are growing up in idolatry. They see the Kaaba has idols in it. They see Safa and Marwa as 2 mountains and people walk between it when they're doing the pilgrimage. So they see there's idols on top of it too. So for them, this is all idolatry. They accept Islam now and they say we need to stop worshipping idols. So for them, they're like, okay, so we need to get rid of all the idolatrous practices. So the first thing in their mind was, there's idols in the Kaaba, so maybe the Kaaba is not important because it's only important because of the idols. And then the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ teaches them that no, the Kaaba was actually built by Prophet Ibrahim and it had no idols in it. And people later on put idols in there. We're eventually going to get rid of the idols and restore it back to what it was supposed to have been. It was not an invented practice by pagans. It actually originated by the Muslims, Prophet Ibrahim. So this is, we're reclaiming it, but it was not an invented thing by pagans, so we don't need to get rid of it completely. Same thing with Safa and Marwa. So some people had the idea that, okay, the Kaaba we know it's built by Prophet Ibrahim, but maybe Safa and Marwa, the ritual of going back and forth, maybe it was invented by pagan idolaters because they put their two idols on top of it. And this verse is clarifying that says, no, walking between Safa and Marwa is just like the Kaaba. Yes, it had the idols on it, but originally the ritual of going between Safa and Marwa, walking back and forth, it has a monotheistic history because it's traced all the way back to Prophet Ibrahim. So this verse is a response by saying the mentality that some of you have, that we shouldn't walk between Safa and Marwa because they had two idols, thinking that it was something that pagans introduced, is being refuted, is being responded to. So what is the classification of walking between Safa and Marwa, when you're doing Umrah or when you're doing Hajj? It's mandatory. It's mandatory. You have to do it. So if someone reads this and they think, oh, la junaha alayhi, yeah, you could do it if you feel like it. And I've actually seen people in Mecca quoting this verse and say, yeah, you don't really have to do it, because they're ignorant. They don't know anything about the history of the Qur'an. They haven't studied anything. So this is an example of when you don't know the context behind something, you could completely misunderstand the Qur'an. Completely. Because you think that the literal wording somehow, devoid of context, implies something. This is not a legal ruling. This is a response. Right? So if you learn the 5 legal rulings and you go, oh, if it's not a problem, then it falls into category number 3. This is not legal wording, right? So this is the problem that many people have. I've mentioned this in other places, but like sunnah is a problem. The word sunnah is a major problem because people don't understand the context of the word sunnah. So what does sunnah mean? So people say, is it sunnah to wear a turban? They say, is it sunnah to fast on Monday? There's a world of difference between wearing a turban and fasting on Monday. Why? If you say it's sunnah to wear a turban, say, well, what does sunnah mean? Well, sunnah is what the Prophet did. So did the Prophet wear a turban? Yes, he did. So is it sunnah to wear a turban? You say, yes, it's sunnah to wear a turban. Okay, did the Prophet fast on Mondays? Yes, he did. So it's sunnah to fast on Mondays? Yes. So are they the same sunnah? No, they're not. So is it sunnah to live in Mecca? The Prophet lived in Mecca. Right? No, it's not. Is it sunnah to get married at the age of 25? So if you missed the mark, you missed the sunnah, Or if you wanted to get married now and you're younger, you should wait. You should follow the sunnah and get married at the age of 25 because the Prophet did it. That's not what sunnah means. So sunnah has 2 meanings depending on how you're using the word. It actually has more than 2 meanings. Sunnah can mean what the Prophet did. Sunnah can also mean what the Prophet did and wanted others to do. Okay? So if you use the word sunnah without defining what you mean by that term, you're going to have a complete misunderstanding of Islam. And that's what a lot of people do. They throw the word sunnah out. This is sunnah to do this and sunnah to do that, and you're not following the sunnah. Which sunnah are you talking about? The sunnah of what the Prophet did, or the sunnah of what the Prophet did and wanted us to do? There's a big, big difference between the two. Same thing here. فَلَا جُنَاحَ عَلَيْهِ. Linguistically, literally, it means there's no sin on you if you do it. So if you look at it from a legal perspective, if there's no sin on you, we have 5 categories in Islamic law, it falls in category number 3. If you look at it in its right context, it's saying that people had a wrong notion thinking that it's sinful to walk between Safa and Marwa, even though it's mandatory part of Hajj and Umrah. But now this is refuting them and saying, no, it's not sinful. You're wrong. You misunderstood it. Totally different context, right? So you have to define what your terms mean. And that's very, very important. Okay. We spent a lot of time on that. Okay, so that's an example of sin, and this is what Aisha clarified to her nephew Urwa ibn Zubair, that this was the background. So it's not a legal ruling. It actually is mandatory, but the response, this verse is responding to people's misconceptions that existed at the time. Okay. Question on this?
So when do you know if it's a legal ruling or not? Is it always the context, or is there other conditions to meet that?
So how do you know if it's a legal ruling or not? That you learn that when you study like the principles of how to interpret the Quran. And we're going to give you like a taste of that in this class. The more you learn, the more you study, the more you understand, the more you begin to kind of see it. Right? It's like any field. Right? Like a first year medical student is going to be like, well, how do you know whether to, for surgery, how do you know whether to cut the person from this side or from this side? Which side do you cut when you're going to get to the middle, right? It's like you learn in time. You learn with principles. You get to figure out why is it. What are the pros and cons of cutting from here, and what are the pros and cons of cutting from here, and you decide which way to cut. Right? But it takes a while. So we're going to give you some, inshallah, some taste of how you begin to develop it. But you could say it's kind of like a sense that you build up over time. The more you look at the Quran, the more you study all the different aspects of Islam, you kind of get a feel for what was meant and what was not meant. Okay. Any other questions on this? Question cancelled?
It's not relevant directly to like Quran, but it's like, I guess, a question that I wanted to ask about the two definitions of sunnah.
Okay.
So if one of them is that you're just looking at the life of the Prophet, but it's not something he taught you wanted you to do, is there still a minimal reward in that? Or any reward because you're doing it as a
Yeah. So side question. If you're doing something that the Prophet did and you're doing it out of love for him, but he didn't really recommend you to do it, you get rewarded for your love for him.
for that intention?
Yeah, for that intention, but not for the. It's not for the act itself. It's for the love that you get rewarded. Yeah. All right, Frank has how many verses in the Quran were revealed as cause incidents? So we're gonna answer that before we finish this class, inshallah. And then the word Jedi's all of a sudden came.
He was guessing at Harry.
Oh, the Harry Potter? Yeah, no, no different than Jedi's. In the verse, was the verse referred to the believers of Buddhism? Is he talking about this verse? Safa and Marwa verse? Of Buddhism? No, it's talking about the pagan Arabs. So the pagan Arabs, they were thinking, they put the two idols on Safa and Marwa. So it was referring to that, not to Buddhism in particular. All right, Kenny.
So my question is regarding the verse. So towards the end of the verse, it says there is no blame. We're walking between them.
Mm-hmm.
Grammatically, would that be a negation and then affirmation? Because it says like there is no God. That's a negation, but God. So would that be like a negation and then an affirmation at the end? And whoever volunteers good, then indeed Allah is appreciative and knowing. And this denies that it's not because of that, and it affirms that they should. Is that thing that they look at as well, or?
Yeah, that's a good point actually. So it's not exactly a negation and affirmation, but you did bring up a good point. Is that the second part? So what one is saying is there's no problem when you do it. Then وَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ شَاكِرٌ عَلِيمٌ. Whoever volunteers good, whoever does something good, Allah is appreciative and knowing. So the word tatawwa also causes confusion, because what happens is in the classification of Islamic law, the category of recommended but not required is called tatawwa. Right? It's like nafl or mustahab, or these terms that people use. So that's another thing that can cause confusion. As for what you were saying, that was just a reflection that you reminded me of. As for your reflection on negation and then affirmation, no, that's not the case linguistically here. It's not like the la ilaha illallah. That's a different. This is I don't think it comes under that context. Okay. Any other questions?
Do we see the
that the first verse in the surah?
No, this is verse 158.
Okay, so can we see the one just before that? And does that matter for us to
So
find the context?
sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So let's go 157. أولئك عليهم صلوات من ربهم ورحمة وأولئك هم المهتدون. Those are the ones upon whom are blessings from their Lord and mercy, and it is those who are rightly guided. So no.
So,
No, it doesn't.
that's like finishing a sentence.
Right, previous, and then it changes. Right. So it's actually a completely different section, actually. In الصفا والمروة من شعائر الله. Even when you're memorizing the Quran, that's like a separate section. So when you're memorizing, usually you stop here, and then you come back the next day and you start the next page from إن الصفا والمروة من شعائر الله. So yeah. All right. All right. Let's continue. So the next verse is a verse which says, "And to Allah belongs the east and the west." So let me pull up this verse for you. It's also in Baqarah. So 115. So we're talking about incident, cause, knowing the cause, knowing the background, and how that determines whether you understand it correctly or not. So here, this verse, وَلِلَّهِ الْمَشْرِقُ وَالْمَغْرِبُ, and to Allah belongs the east and the west. فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. So wherever you turn, that is the face of Allah, meaning the countenance of Allah. Allah is there, basically. Wherever you turn, إِنَّ اللَّهَ وَاسِعٌ عَلِيمٌ. Allah is all-encompassing and knowing. So the key here is فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Wherever you turn, Allah is there. So what does that mean, right? This verse could be interpreted or misinterpreted to mean that you don't need to worry about the Qibla direction, right? It's like, once you open your compass and say, we don't need to open our compass, we don't need to check the Qibla. Whichever direction we pray, it doesn't really matter, because wherever we turn, Allah belongs the east and the west. And wherever you turn, Allah is there. So it doesn't matter which direction you pray. So it's very easy for someone to go and quote this verse out of its context or out of knowing the background of what this is saying, and to try and use it to say that it doesn't matter which direction you pray. But there's actually a background. So the background is, and the background is in the previous verses, in this case. So the background is that the Jews, they were objecting to the change of the Qibla. So what happened was, when Muslims migrated from Mecca to Medina, initially they were facing Jerusalem. Okay, so they're facing Jerusalem, and then the Qibla, or the direction of prayer for prayer, it changed. So when it changed, they were making fun of the Muslims and saying, they were upset, first of all, because when the Jews thought that the Muslims are following them, they feel like superior. So these people they're imitating us, so we're good. And then they changed. That signal that there's a break between the previous revelation from Prophet Musa and the new revelation that's coming to Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and many other things. So this verse was revealed as a response to the criticism that was coming from the Jews in the city of Medina, in and around the city of Medina. So the response is that if you're criticizing us for changing the direction is not because Allah is existing in a specific direction. The reason for our change in Qibla or direction had to do with what the implication of the direction of facing towards Mecca really meant. There's a lot of implications. I'm not going to go into it here, but it implies something. It implies unity of the Muslim community. It implies identification of a Muslim community. It implies power, in the sense that Mecca would be recaptured, and so many other things. So this is a response to the Jews who are complaining and saying, how could you have faced one way in one direction in prayer, and now you're facing a different way? This verse is responding and saying, to Allah belongs the east and the west. The direction doesn't matter. We didn't face the direction of Jerusalem because we thought Allah is in the direction of Jerusalem. We faced the direction of Jerusalem because Allah told us to face the direction of Jerusalem, and there was a reason for facing it at the time. And now the reason has changed. Now Allah is telling us to face the direction of Mecca, and there's no issue. Because فَأَيْنَمَا تُوَلُّوا فَثَمَّ وَجْهُ اللَّهِ. Whichever direction you turn, Allah is there. It doesn't matter which direction you turn. So the response now is coming to the change of the Qibla. So This verse, number one, responded to their criticism. And the second is the Jews were criticizing, or some of the Muslims, it got to them that some of the Muslims had died before this change took place. So they were concerned, saying, are the prayers of those Muslims who were facing Jerusalem, does their prayer count? Because they were facing the wrong direction. So what's going to happen when you're facing the wrong direction? So now they're concerned. So this verse is answering them too and saying, doesn't matter what direction you face. Your prayer is accepted as long as you were doing what Allah had told you at the time. And in another class, Islamic Law 1, we're going to learn that if you cannot figure out the Qibla, the direction of prayer, but you try your best, does your prayer count? Yes, it does. Question is, do you have to repeat your prayer if you find out that you were wrong 5 minutes after you finish prayer? So you looked, you checked, you prayed in this direction, and then all of a sudden you said, Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and then someone walks in the room and they go, what the heck are you doing? You're 180 degrees opposite direction of the Qibla. Looks like you completely messed up the entire thing. So you better get up and pray again. Do you have to pray again? Right. He finished the prayer. Finished the prayer. So, do you have to? 5 categories, right? Mandatory, recommended, permissible. So is it mandatory that you have to repeat your prayer? The answer is no. You don't. Can you? Yeah, you can. But do you have to? No, you don't. Right? But 5 minutes later, you remembered that you did not have wudu. Do you have to repeat your prayer? Yes. Okay. And then, yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. So that right. So it only applies if they tried their best to try to figure out and they were mistaken in their decision. If they didn't try at all, then yes, you have to repeat. But as long as they tried their best. Okay. So that responds to this one. Okay, let's move on. So 200. So we're seeing how someone could actually read this. And you can imagine. I mean, I can imagine, and I've probably seen someone giving like a sermon, like a khutbah on this, and someone who has a weird understanding of Islam, and they're convincing people based upon this verse that the Qibla doesn't matter. And you can see how people would buy into this, right? Because that's what the verse seems to be saying when you have no understanding of historical context. Right? So it's very, very important to understand that context.
Then it also has the face of Allah in there as well, which is, for some people it was a debate whether
Yeah.
it had a face or not.
Yeah, that one we're not going to get into. That's another class. But yeah, that's another thing, right? So there's so many different understandings that could take place. This one says, فَإِذَا قَضَيْتُم مَّنَاسِكَكُمْ فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَذِكْرِكُمْ آبَاءَكُمْ أو أَشَدَّ ذِكْرًا. And when you have completed your rites, when you've completed your manasik referring to you've completed the rituals of Hajj. It's referring to Hajj. Okay, so once you've completed the rituals, meaning the movements and what you do and where you stand and all that, it says فَاذْكُرُوا اللَّهَ كَذِكْرِكُمْ. Remember Allah the way in which you remember your fathers, or with greater remembrance. Right. So what it's saying is, after you finish the Hajj, when you're on Hajj, when you're performing the pilgrimage to Mecca, once you've finished all the stuff you need to do for Hajj, or the main stuff you need to do for Hajj, what should you be doing? You should remember Allah. But how do you remember Allah? It says, remember Allah the way that you remember your forefathers, or more than that. So if someone reads this, what is this supposed to mean? Right? Yes, it is. It's the beauty of having a Mac, I believe. Yes. Alright, you're welcome. So our PC broke, so now we happen to have this temporarily here. Okay, so that's what we have here. So what does that mean? Somebody who's never read the background context of it, what would you infer this means? If don't answer if you already read, the background. But if you've never read the background, what do you think this could possibly mean? Just throw out an idea. You know, you're not going to be sinful for throwing out an idea. It's an intellectual exercise here.
After the right is zikr, and that zikr should mean more to you than remembering the people that were part of your family.
Okay, that's good. So Saqib saying it could be that after you finish the parts of Hajj, remember Allah, make zikr, remember Allah, but remember Allah in a way that you give more importance to Allah than the way you give importance to your family. Okay, because these people used to give a lot of importance to their family. It's understood in an Arab society, tribal society, family is a very, very important thing.
This could have been a Meccan surah before the people really understood Allah. Or say it's not, but it's
Yeah, it's not. Anyone else? Just a guess. What could it possibly mean? The what? Don't engage into worldly talk. What does that have to do with the forefathers or the ancestors? Okay. So the respect that they had for their forefathers, Allah deserves that. So very like what Saqib was saying. Yeah. Did the Arabs used to worship their ancestors? There are some religions where they worship their ancestors, right? Were the Arabs among those people? They were not. They did not worship them technically, right? Like other religions do. Like they put the picture of the ancestor there and they actually bow down to it and stuff like that. The Arabs were not like that. But they highly respected them. So what's another potential interpretation? Just throw something out there.
Would it mean that, like, my fathers, like, it's not actually your direct bloodline, and you, like, prophets?
Okay. So maybe it means the prophets before us remember Allah the way in which you remember them. In the sense that you respect them. Well, it's fine. I just want to know what possibly people could think of. Because people do this. Look, this is a reality, right? I know across America, there are Qur'an meetup groups. You go to meetup.com, and there's like Qur'an meetup. We're going to get together. We're going to open the translation of the Qur'an. Or if they know Arabic, we're going to open the Qur'an in Arabic because we're Arabs and we know Arabic and somehow we're cool because of that. And we're going to sit down and we're going to try and figure out, what does this verse mean to you? And they're going to talk about, well, this verse means this to me. So now all of a sudden they're reading the Qur'an and they come to this verse. So what does this verse mean to you? So you say, well, to me, this verse means, and they're going to give some interpretation. Right? So the question is, how valid, how accurate is that interpretation? People do this regularly. So it's important to understand that some verses, not saying the majority of verses in the Qur'an, right? But some verses require background context. So if you get 98% is good and you misunderstand 2% of the Qur'an, you're like, that's like an A+ almost. Is that good? No, it's the Qur'an. You're not supposed to misunderstand any of the Qur'an. Like it's a serious thing to misunderstand, to completely misunderstand certain verses of the Qur'an. So we got to be extra careful. That's what I'm saying. That's why I'm emphasizing this point. So, but I can imagine someone in a meetup group come up with all these different ideas, right? You can imagine people coming with different things. So here, there's the context. So what's the context? The context is told to us by the companions who actually lived with the revelation, who lived in that time, who told us the history. They said that what used to happen is that in Hajj, there are three main places. There's Mina, Muzdalifah, and Arafah. If you've not been for Hajj, you probably don't know this, so don't worry about it. So what happens is, once you finish Arafah, you finish the most important part of your Hajj. So now it's just like, mostly like chilling out. It's not that important. What used to happen is when they stopped in Muzdalifah area, they used to have poetry competitions because they felt like we're kind of done with most of our Hajj. So they would start reciting poetry about our ancestors were this, and they fought like this, and they were so brave, and they were this. and you're supposed to be in the middle of Hajj, right? It's like someone who does like the most important part of Hajj, and then they come back and they're like, we have 3 more days left for Hajj, but I'm gonna catch up on my soap opera. So they turn on the TV and they're like sitting there. You're like, what are you doing? You're watching TV and Hajj is not over yet. They say, no, the most important part is done, so now we can kind of do this. Allah is responding to them by saying, you finished the important part of Hajj, and now Hajj is not even over, and what do? You start having boasting competitions about our ancestors were like this, and our tribe was like this. So Allah is saying, stop wasting your time with these competitions, and remember Allah. Your Hajj is not over. Remember Allah the way in which you would remember your forefathers, or more. So those competitions about how great your ancestors were and you were competing with one another, you should remember Allah because you're in the middle of Hajj, even while you're in this state, because this is more important, right? So that's kind of like a response to them, that yeah, we know you like to boast about your ancestors, but you know what's more important? Kind of like similar to what you were saying, it's more important to remember Allah, but instead of doing that, focus on Allah, right? So the ka means like. So the ka dhikrikum means in the way in which you actually remember your ancestors. So like in place of that, the same way you do that, you should be doing this. Or in fact, you should be doing more than that, right? You should be doing more than that. Okay, so that's the context, right? If we don't have the context, we won't understand the verse properly. So that's just 2 examples of where it's important to have a context. We're going to go through a bunch of other verses, but we're going to go very quickly. And then I'm going to explain how scholars have processed all of these background verses. So it's a long, I don't think we're going to be able to finish today's notes. You know what that means, right? Maybe there's no exam this week. So yay. That's what I was hoping for, alhamdulillah or something, or a yay or something like that. Alright, so moving on. Any questions on this so far? Are we clear? I'm just.
Other side question is that, okay.
Is it somewhat related? We'll find out.
So this like verse, I'm just curious now, like if Allah is saying in the Quran that you should not, you should remember as much as you remember your forefathers, isn't that borderline weird? Like, I mean, they're Muslims performing Hajj. They're not like the idol worshippers or people worshiping their ancestors. Yet like Allah is saying like remember Allah, remember me as much as you are remembering your ancestors in this competition.
So it's like this. It's like someone is an athlete, okay, and they train 5 hours a day, and they're not Muslim, and then they become Muslim, and they're struggling with waking up for Fajr. You're like, you used to train 5 hours a day. You can wake up for Fajr. So it's like you're telling them, you should, suck it up, put some extra effort in there, the way that you used to train 5 hours a day for your competition. So it's kind of like comparing. It's like you did this, you put so much emphasis on this. Now that you're Muslim, you could do this the same, or you could do more, because now you're Muslim. That's kind of what it's like. Yeah. Sure. All right. So let's
Sorry, this verse that was revealed, it was because the Muslims were doing this, or the pagan Arabs were doing it, so they were being told that the Arabs used to do.
So it's 2. So it's 1, it's referring to the pagans, saying that, you know what, you guys should remember Allah instead. And it's also referring to the Muslims who may have been a little bit more lax, and it's saying, look, you used to do this before, you can do this too. All right, so it's referring to both. All right, the next verse, we saw 2:20, which was the one we just saw. So the next verse, literally the next verse, complete change of topic. وَلَا تَنْكِحُ الْمُشْرِكَاتِ حَتَّى يُؤْمِنْ. Do not marry idolatrous women until they believe. وَلَأَمَةٌ مُؤْمِنَةٌ خَيْرٌ مِّن مُشْرِكَةٍ وَلَوْ أَعْجَبَتْكُمْ. And a believing slave woman is better than an idolater, even if she pleases you. And then it talks about, and don't marry idolatrous men until they believe, and believing slave is better than an idolatrous man, even though he may please you. So what is there's a background that was mentioned about this verse in historical records. So background was that there was a companion, one of the companions of the Prophet. He migrated to Medina, just like all the Muslims migrated to Medina. Then one day he went and visited Mecca while Mecca was still being controlled by the pagan Arabs. So he went there and he met his old girlfriend who was still in Mecca. So she invited him and said, come on, let's have some fun. And he's like, look, I'm Muslim now, but we can do this the halal way. So let's get married and then we can do that, but I have to go and check with the Prophet if I'm allowed to marry you now because you're not Muslim. So if you're not willing to accept Islam, I can't have relationship outside of marriage, but maybe we can get married and then, we can, you could be my wife and then everything will be halal, it'll be good. So he went and asked the Prophet, peace be upon him, and then this verse was revealed. Which basically says, no, you're not allowed to marry her because she's an idolater. She worships idols. She's a pagan. You're not allowed to marry pagan women. Right? And then it talks about the vice versa. Pagan Muslim women are not allowed to marry pagan men. So this clarified that part. Right? So that was a background. There's another verse in the Qur'an. So I'm just going to give you a bunch of examples real quick. I'm just going to tell you the background of them, but not clarify too much about them. Do you want to see the verse, or should we just quickly move through it and I just read it to you? Just read it to you? Okay, I'll read it to you. Okay, so chapter 4, verse 11 says, Allah commands you with regards to your children's inheritance. So the verses about inheritance are revealed. So what's the background? One of the companions, Jabir ibn Abdullah, he was sick and he thought he might be dying. So he goes and he asks the Prophet, peace be upon him, how should he divide his wealth among his children when he's going to write his last will? And then these verses come down and they're revealed. Another verse, 443, says, O you who have believed, do not approach prayer while you are intoxicated until you know what you're saying. So that's the verse about alcohol, one of the gradual prohibition verses on alcohol. So what happened is that before this, Abdurrahman ibn Auf, one of the companions, he invited some of the other companions over to his house to drink, and they got drunk. So they're all Muslims, but they're drinking because it's not prohibited to drink yet. So they all drink, they got drunk, and then one of them goes and leads the prayer, and they're all praying, and they're a little bit drunk. So while they're praying, he made a major mistake in the Qur'an. And then these verses came down and were revealed, don't approach prayer when you're in a state of intoxication. And we'll stop here. We'll take a break, pray Isha. We'll come back and continue, inshallah. Any questions that you think you're going to forget before we come back from the break?
Chapter 80, Surah Abasa. So that was one that was, there was an incident, right?
Clear incident, Abasa wa Tawalla, yes.
It came right after.
Exactly. Good example. Yeah. Okay, so we'll break and we'll come back, inshallah. Okay, let's continue. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I updated your quiz already, so it's 12 questions. 13 and 14 were removed, and they're gonna be showing up on your next week's exam, inshallah ta'ala. So the following depends how far we get, but if there is a quiz, then it'll show up. If not, maybe I'll split it up. Maybe I'll give you half. You prefer to wait and take the whole thing in one shot, or would you rather have like half of this section this week and then half the following week?
Yeah.
Breaks the load for you is better, right? Yeah, okay, inshallah. So you do have exam this week, inshallah. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So another verse. We talked about do not approach prayer when you're intoxicated and the background behind that. Another verse, there is not upon those who believe and do righteousness any blame concerning what they have eaten, if they fear Allah and believe and do righteous deeds. So basically what it's saying is, those who believe and they do good deeds, there's no blame on them for what they've eaten, as long as they have fear of Allah and they believe and they do good deeds. So there was one of the companions by the name of Qudama ibn Maz'un. He had a drinking problem and he could not stop himself from drinking alcohol. So one time he was drinking and he got caught when Umar was the Khalifa. So what happened was that there's a punishment, there's a penalty for drinking alcohol. You get whipped. Okay? So he got caught by Umar, and Umar was going to whip him. So he quoted this verse. And he says, there's a verse in the Qur'an that says, as long as you fear Allah, you believe, you do righteous deeds, there is no blame concerning what you've eaten. Right? So Umar obviously whipped him anyways, because this was not the correct context. Now we don't know if he was saying it when he was drunk, trying to change the context, or he didn't know the context, because he's a companion. Either way, he tried to justify it. And you can imagine there's people who try to make this verse seem that as long as you believe, do good deeds, and you fear Allah, it says, there's no blame for what you have eaten. Right? So it seems like it's okay, you know. As long as you're a believer, you eat some pork, as long as you have fear of Allah and you're a true believer, you're okay. You know, that rule is for people who have weakness of faith. But if your faith is true, it's okay to eat bacon or something like that, but it's not. So there's a context here. Context is that some of the companions, they died before the verses about drinking were revealed, about drinking alcohol. So what happened is their friends, they were concerned. They said, but they used to drink, and now the revelation came down which prohibited drinking completely, but they died. So are they going to be held accountable? So the important thing is, it's a past tense verse. So it says, there is no on those who believe and do good deeds, there's no blame concerning what they have eaten, meaning in the past, right? Before the verse had been revealed regarding that, as long as they feared Allah and they believe and they do good deeds, then they're going to be fine. So it's in context of what happened in the past. It doesn't mean that as long as you believe in Allah and you do good and you fear Allah, that what you eat doesn't matter. Because that would be a direct contradiction between all the verses that's telling you not to drink and not to eat pork and not to do this and not to do that. You know, so that's the context. Another verse. Indeed, those who came with the accusation are a group among you. And it's a lot of verses regarding this. This has a context of people who accused Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, of adultery. So they accused her that she had gone and committed adultery, and this verse is revealed in response, exonerating her, clearing her of all blame against her, directly in that context. 58:1 says, surely Allah has heard the speech of the one who argues with you. So we saw that one already. Khawla complaining about her husband's behavior. 65:4 women who have despaired of menstruation, if you are in doubt, they will have a waiting period for 3 months. So normally when it comes to divorce, if a woman has a menstruation, she's going to wait 3 periods. But what if she doesn't have menstruation, right? So the ruling is she waits 3 months for divorce period and other things. So it's saying women who have despaired of menstruation, if you are in doubt. So why is there a if you are in doubt statement? There's no need for that. It could have just said women who don't have menstruation will wait 3 months, whereas the other verse says women who have a menstrual period, they're going to wait 3 periods. So why is there a statement in the Qur'an which says if you are in doubt? Because there's a context. Context was a companion by the name of Ubay ibn Ka'b. He asked the question when he saw the verse of the Qur'an which talks about menstrual periods, and he says, well, what about young girls who don't have a menstrual period? Or what about really old women who've gone through menopause, they don't have a period? What's going to happen to them? And then these verses were revealed in that context. All right? 66:3. And remember when the Prophet confided to one of his wives a statement, and when she informed another of it, and Allah showed it to him, he made known part of it and ignored a part. So we've seen this before. Remember we saw this, I think, first day of class, about revelation, non-Quranic revelation to the Prophet, how Allah showed it to the Prophet, this secret between the wives about the incident of honey and bad breath, and we talked about that. So again, what is the secret? What is the context? It's the honey and the jealous wives and the jealousy between them. So you have to know something about the context to understand what it's talking about. Otherwise, if you read this verse, and remember when the Prophet confided to one of his wives, okay, which wife doesn't matter, but he confided to one of his wives a statement, and when she informed another of it, Allah showed it to him, and he made known part of it and ignored a part of it. And when he informed her about it, she said, who told you this? And he said, I was informed by the all-knowing, the all-acquainted. So what is that supposed to mean if you don't know the story? If there's no background, that means nothing. Like there's no meaning to that verse of the Qur'an if you don't know what the context is. You can never figure out what's supposed to mean, or what's the point of it, or what's the lesson behind that verse. So knowing the context is very, very important. And then even the most basic thing, most people have memorized, Tabbat yada abi lahabi wa tab. Right? May the hands of Abu Lahab be ruined, and may he be ruined. If you don't know who Abu Lahab is, why is this guy being ruined? Like, why is this guy, what's so bad about him? Why is he being destroyed? Why are they talking bad about him? You have to know a little bit about who Abu Lahab was, and the context, and what happened, and all of that stuff. So, and then of course, Abasa wa Tawalla is another example, right? So, knowing that there was a blind man who came, and he was trying to speak to the Prophet, and the Prophet was in the middle of something very, very important. He was meeting a very, very important person, and the Prophet got upset because he was being distracted, so he frowned, Abasa wa Tawalla, and he turned away. So there's a context behind that. Otherwise, it's not clear what it's talking about. You know, who's frowning? He doesn't even explain who's frowning, and who's turning away, and all of that stuff.
I remember when I first read that surah a long time ago, I didn't understand it.
Yeah.
I didn't know what it was talking about.
Yeah. So context is really, really important. And unfortunately, it's so sad to see the majority of translations of the Qur'an, they don't give any context to these verses which need some context. It's just really, where it's sad that we don't have better translations, or a little bit of commentary in those translations that the translation itself is good, but then it just doesn't care to add any of the commentary. Or if you have a commentary, it's just like way too much commentary. So we have either like all translation and no like good notes that clarify this, or we have like, here's the 10-volume one. So you get to go with this one which has nothing, or you go to 10 volumes and you'll never be able to finish it in your life. We need balance, right? We need something a little bit in between, inshallah. So a decent one is Yahya Amir's expanded study edition. It's 1 volume. It's better. I'd say it's much, much better. It's recently come out.
Surah Al-Kahf would also be a good example of context, in terms of, although it doesn't need context on its own, but the context in which it was.
It helped. So there's many, many verses. The context helps us to clarify, but the question is the context the cause of revelation? So we're going to find that out right now. All right. So moving on to derivation. So how do you figure out whether a verse actually has a cause, or if it has a context, and specifically, whether something is the cause or not? Well, first of all, the way to know it is, one, if it's very clearly indicated in the Qur'an, Like for example, the woman who complains about her husband, that's like very, very clear cut. That there's an incident that happened and is telling you the incident within the verses that are being revealed. The second way is if the Prophet tells us very clearly that this is the cause of what happened. The third way is if one of the companions tells us that the verse of the Qur'an was revealed and this is the cause of the verse being revealed, right? Why the companions? Because they're eyewitnesses, right? And it had to be an eyewitness account of someone who experienced the revelation. So you have to have someone who lived there and said, you know, I was present when this verse was revealed and this is what happened, right? So someone has to explain that. So like for example, Aisha, when she's saying that the two idols on Safa and Marwa, so you misunderstood that, she's saying I lived in that time when this is what I grew up with. There were the two idols were there and people were thinking this. So she's speaking from her eyewitness account. She's not speaking of what she heard from somebody else. So you have to have basically an eyewitness account and then a chain of narration that comes later. So there are different wordings. Now this is where it gets a little bit complicated. Okay, when the companions speak, or the reports that we have about them, the wording that they use is not 100% clear cut. There's some level of ambiguity in them. So for example, companions would use words like, this verse was revealed about such and such incident. So look at the wording. This verse was revealed about. Okay? Now, that's ambiguous. That can either give you the impression that this thing happened and then immediately the verse was revealed and the verse is a direct cause of this, or it could mean that Allah revealed this verse and it's connected with this other action that's happening, but the action is not a direct consequence of the verse being revealed, right? So oftentimes the companions, when they said this verse was revealed about such and such thing, what they meant was that a particular action somehow came under the category of discussion of that verse. And we do this all the time. We still do this in today's language, right? So for example, you go to someone and they're like, you know, I have a drinking problem and I need to, you know, I don't think I'll ever be able to quit. You tell them, you know, you should just cut down. You say, no, I cannot cut down. I'm either going to stop completely or I'm never going to be able to quit. And you say, look, Allah revealed the verse about not approaching prayer when you're intoxicated. He revealed it for someone like you, right? So you said, He revealed it for someone like you, right? So what you're saying is, this verse applies to your circumstance. But obviously, this person is not the cause of revelation. So the companions, when they were living at the time, when they're teaching their students and they're explaining the Qur'an, they would use a similar wording. They would say, this verse was revealed about Abu Bakr, for example. Does it mean that the incident that happened in Abu Bakr's life is the direct incident and cause of the revelation of that verse? Not necessarily. So what they were saying is, whatever happened in Abu Bakr's life, this verse directly relates to it. So sometimes they would use ambiguous wording, which when they wanted to say that there's a direct cause of revelation, they would say the same wording. And when they wanted to say that this applies to that, but is not the direct cause, they would use the same wording. This is why, this has caused a lot of misunderstandings among Muslim scholars in history. So what happens is, if scholars look at the report, right, and they think that when a companion says this verse was revealed about such and such, if they think that automatically that implies that it's a direct cause of the revelation, that incident is a direct cause, and that companion is saying it's a direct cause, then what's going to happen? You're going to have a lot of verses that have cause of revelation, or you're going to have a small number of verses that have cause of revelation? A lot. You're going to have a lot of them. But if you're critical and you say, no, when the companions speak like this, they don't mean that this is the direct cause. What they mean is that this verse applies to this incident. Are you going to have lesser number or higher number? Lesser number, okay? So I'm going to give you examples. So for example, verse 4:119. Okay, it says in the Qur'an that Satan is saying, I will command them to alter Allah's creation. Okay, so there's a verse where it says Shaitan is saying, he's being quoted, he's saying, I will tell people, human beings, that they will alter the creation of Allah. Right? So what does it mean, alter the creation of Allah? Meaning people will somehow change things about their body and things like that. So when we talk about tattoos not being allowed in Islam and other things like that, it all comes from this concept of changing the creation of Allah that Allah has created you on, right? People gapping their teeth and all different types of beautification and all that. So what happened was, Anas ibn Malik, who is a companion, he says that this verse was revealed about castration. Okay, castration meaning cutting off your testicles. So, and people would castrate themselves when they were trying to be what's the right word, like becoming ascetic and not wanting to have relationships and just saying, I'm giving up this world completely, I don't need to have children, I don't need to do any of these things. So they would, like monks and what's the other word, monks basically, or priests or something like that, they would castrate themselves so that they'd never have children and they'd never engage in a relationship or something like that. So what is Anas ibn Malik saying? Anas ibn Malik is a companion, and he's saying that this verse where Shaitan says, I will command them to alter Allah's creation, he's saying this verse was revealed about castration. Does it mean that somebody got castrated and then the verse was revealed in response to that castration? No. But it might give the impression, if someone reads this, it might give them the impression that Anas ibn Malik witnessed somebody either threatening to castrate himself or actually castrated himself, and then Allah revealed this verse. But that's not what he was saying. So wording is very, very important when you're studying or when you're trying to categorize which verses have a direct cause of revelation and which ones don't. Right? So because the companions used ambiguous wording, it's really, really important to identify whether they intended that this is a direct cause or not a direct cause. So let's understand the difference. I want you to be very, very clear about this. If Anas ibn Malik said, this verse was revealed after a person got castrated, then it's clear cut. That what happened was, there was someone among the Muslims or non-Muslims, doesn't matter, someone castrated themselves, or they made a threat, I'm going to castrate myself. And then immediately Anas ibn Malik is witnessing that, and he says, then the verse was revealed. And the verse was revealed addressing this particular person, and of course it's a general rule that applies to everybody else. But he's not saying that. He's saying this verse was revealed about castration. So it could mean potentially that someone did it or threatened to do it, or it could mean that he is saying, somebody came and asked him, what does Islam say about castration? So he's thinking, okay, I want to give an answer to this person, but I want to use the Qur'an as a proof in my answer. So while he's giving the Qur'an as a proof in his answer, he quotes the verse of the Qur'an and he says, there's a verse in the Qur'an that was revealed about castration. It's this, that Shaitan is going to try to get people to change the creation of Allah. Is this clear? Yes? It's not just like fake nod heads, right? I understand it, right? Okay, inshallah. Good. Alright. Alhamdulillah. So that's clear. So what would clear wording look like? So clear wording would look like if the companion said, the reason that this verse was revealed was this thing, this and this. The difference between this verse was about and this verse was revealed when this such and such incident happened, right? Or something clear like the Prophet was asked about this incident and then Allah revealed this verse right afterwards, right? So there's a lot of ambiguity in wording. So there's two schools of thought, you can say, okay? There's two madhabs. One madhab is to say that the companions, whenever they're saying that this verse was revealed about something, it's to take their wording in the way of understanding it, that they're saying this was the direct cause of revelation. So what's going to happen is so somebody asked me a question earlier, how many verses in the Qur'an have direct causes, right? So if you follow the madhab or the school of thought that says whenever a companion says this verse was revealed about this, it means that companion was saying there's a direct cause. What's going to happen? Your number of causes is going to skyrocket big time, because there's so many reports like this. What's going to happen if you say, no, that's not what they meant? When they said it was about this, they were just giving their own explanation of the verse and tying it back to an incident to give an example for people. What's going to happen to the number of verses that you identify as having a direct cause? It's going to go significantly down. Okay? So that's the first part. Now, what happens when you have multiple causes for one verse? So this is the same thing what we've been talking about. What happens when you go through books of hadith and you go through books of tafsir, and then it says, according to Abdullah ibn Umar, this verse was revealed about this incident. According to Abdullah ibn Abbas, this verse was revealed about this incident. According to Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, this verse was revealed about this incident. Which incident was it? Why are three companions having three different opinions? So you get all confused. Right? So it's very, very important to understand this, because I remember when I studied this subject the first 3 times in 3 different schools, extremely confusing. You say, which one is, why can't they agree upon one? Like, how can this be the case? And all the reports are equally authentic. How can that be? So something's not right. So that's why I'm going into a little bit more detail. So this is very, very technical, but it can be very important because people get very confused about this. Okay? Before I continue, are there any questions? Does anyone need coffee? Okay, mashallah. It's not working? Frank has a question. Half this week, please. Okay, we'll do half this week. Yes. Okay. Yay. Okay. If the companions are making a statement regarding this verse was revealed, did the companions witness any of the verses given to our Prophet ﷺ? Yes, actually. So they were, or did they just receive each verse dictated to our beloved Prophet? So what's happening is 2 things. Some companions are always around the Prophet, and others are working their job or going on a journey. Maybe someone's going to Syria for trade or something like that. So some companions are witnessing the revelation directly, and other companions are getting the news about what verse just got revealed from one of the companions. So it's a good question. So eyewitness doesn't mean that they had to necessarily have witnessed it themselves. It means that they should have been alive to hear a direct report that had come down to another companion. So let's say Abu Bakr was there and Umar was outside, pasturing his sheep or something like that. So Abu Bakr sees the incident that happens, and then he goes and tells Umar. Can Umar say, yeah, I know the cause of this revelation of this verse? Yes, he can. So eyewitness, to clarify, that was ambiguous wording on my part. So eyewitness report basically means the companions should be reporting this stuff. So the reason why this is important is because what happens is there's a generation of students of the companions that came after them. They also have reports, and they say this verse was revealed about this, right? Now the difference is when a student of a companion who never lived with the Prophet, peace be upon him, when they say this verse was about this, we automatically default to them. Even if you take the school of thought that says maybe they're talking about it being the direct cause, you automatically take their understanding as being an explanation of the verse. Why? Because they didn't live it. So how could they mention it directly, right? So that's what I meant to say. So Hope that clarifies something. If you didn't understand that, just don't worry about it. So, alhamdulillah. Okay. Any other questions?
It's okay to have one verse have three different purposes, right? Or example, okay, that's
3 different purposes or 3 different incidents?
Different incidences. Like the Surah Kahf example, it's got. I mean, there's the build up to it, why it was revealed, why there were certain verses in the middle of it, like the one about saying inshallah. That was another sort of, that was there because of something that happened.
So that's the question. So can one verse have more than one incident related to it? So according to our definition of what is the direct cause, it's the direct cause, not what built up to the direct cause. It has to be it would be the last one. So if you had 3 and you say, well, one built up to the other one, built up to the other one, the last one is the direct cause, not the other 2. The other 2 are dismissed, right? So the question is, can you have 3 reports or 2 reports and they're both the direct cause of one specific verse? Something doesn't seem right about it, right? But you're gonna find a bunch of opinions on it. So we're gonna go through all of this in detail, and we're probably not gonna finish in this class, but we'll get started. So this is more like, I'm gonna teach this more from like a historical perspective, and then I'll give you my opinion at the end. So what did Muslim scholars do when they encountered all of these companions saying, this verse was revealed about this, and then another companion saying this verse was revealed about this, and then another companion saying this verse was revealed about this? What's the process? There's all these books out there. What's the process to figure out what the verse is supposed to be saying? What's the background? So the first thing is his multiple causes for one verse. So when you have multiple narrations for one particular verse, it can cause a lot of confusion, a lot of doubt. So the first thing you got to do is you look at 2 reports. If 2 reports are talking about the same verse, and one of them is using ambiguous wording, you go with the one which has clearer wording. So if one companion is saying, this verse was revealed in response to this incident, and another companion is saying, this verse was revealed about this incident, which one is more clear wording? In response to. Right, in response to. So you can say, this guy, the second guy, he probably was giving an explanation and relating it to an incident that happened. So let me give you an example so this clarifies it. I should give you the example before the principle. So you determine which one is ambiguous. So there's a verse. It says, your wives are a tilth for you. So go into your tilth as you wish. This is talking about intercourse. Okay? And the verse of the Qur'an says your wives are a tilth. Tilth is like farming. What's a more modern translation? Like where you plant seeds. Okay? So your wives are like a garden, or a field, right? Like a fertile field for you. So go into your field as you wish. As you wish, in the way that you wish. So we have Abdullah ibn Umar. He says this verse was revealed about anal intercourse, meaning prohibiting anal intercourse, okay, anal sex. This report is in Sahih al-Bukhari. And then Jabir ibn Abdullah, who's also a companion, he's saying that the Jews of Medina, when we were in Medina, the Jews of Medina claimed that if a person had intercourse with his wife from the back, through the vagina, but in the rear, from the back, in that position, then the child that would be born with a deficiency, with like some kind of problem. So when the companions, they went and they asked the Prophet about this, is this true? If you have intercourse with your wife from the back, but in the right place, and you have a child and your wife conceives, will that child be born? Because the Jews have this teaching, and this is what they're saying in Medina. And when they asked the Prophet about this, Allah revealed this verse, teaching them that this was not true. This was just some superstition that they made up. Okay? This report is also in Sahih al-Bukhari. Right? So they're both in the same book. They both have the same authenticity grading. They're two different companions, but both companions are known to be knowledgeable about the Qur'an. So what do you do in this case? You have to figure out, okay, is it one or the other, or is it both, or somehow could it have been revealed in two cases? It can't really be two separate incidents that have the direct cause of revelation. So something has to be going on here. So in this case, they say, look, Abdullah ibn Umar's statement, he was referring to the ruling. So he said this verse was revealed about anal intercourse. Ambiguous wording. According to Jabir is saying that there was this thing going on in Medina, and the companions asked the Prophet about it, and then Allah revealed this verse after the companions asked the Prophet. So which one is clearer language? The second one, Jabir's report about the Jews in Medina. So the scholars looked at it and they said, there's no contradiction here. Abdullah ibn Umar is not saying that Jabir is wrong. And he's not saying that that's not the reason. Abdullah ibn Umar most likely was sitting in a gathering somewhere. Somebody came and asked him, is anal intercourse allowed in Islam? And he's saying, no, it's not. And then he says, he quoted the verse, and he said, this verse was revealed about anal intercourse. So you might ask, okay, how is it revealed about anal intercourse? So you have to understand his tafsir, or his explanation of it. So he's saying, Abdullah ibn Umar's proof is, that says, your wives are a fertile ground for you, which means that fertile ground means there's fertility, meaning that reproduction is going to take place. So it says, go to your fertile ground as you wish, in any manner you wish. You can go from, it doesn't matter if you go from the front or from the back in terms of your position, as long as it's through the vagina, through the correct manner, right? So any position in Islam, like this is a side note, any sexual position in Islam is allowed as long as it's in the right part, right? That could potentially lead to reproduction. Anal intercourse is prohibited. So Abdullah ibn Umar is saying that this is an allusion to the fact that anal intercourse is prohibited because you cannot conceive. There's no fertile ground there. So he was using this as part of his proof on why it's prohibited. And then his statement is recorded that he's quoting this as a proof on the ruling about anal intercourse, but he's not saying in his wording that this is the direct cause of revelation. He's just making it clearer, like the principle that we're talking about? Good. All right, so that's one way to figure out what to do. The second thing is you check which hadith is stronger. So let's say you have two different causes, meaning two documented causes. So you check which one is stronger. So you take a look at the verse, وَالضُّحَى. وَالضُّحَى means, I swear by the forenoon, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى, and by the night when it's still, مَا وَدَّعَكَ رَبُّكَ وَمَا قَلَى. Your Lord has neither forsaken you, nor does He hate you. So this verse is speaking to the Prophet. And what is Allah saying? Your Lord has not left you. He's not forsaken you, He's not left you, nor does He hate you. So in the Qur'an we have this, Allah telling the Prophet in the third person that your Lord doesn't hate you, and He's not left you, and He doesn't hate you. So why would the Prophet think that Allah had left him, or somehow he's earned the displeasure of Allah? There's got to be some incident, right? There has to be some context, because the context is not there in the surah. This is the beginning. وَالضُّحَى وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا سَجَى. Nothing came so far. So now there's got to be some context. So what is the context? So you have one report which says that the Prophet did not receive revelation for a few days, and he was waiting for revelation to come about something. So there was a woman among the Quraysh in Mecca. She started ridiculing him because he couldn't give an answer. And she said, Muhammad, I think your Satan has left you. It's a way of making fun of him. She's like, you're possessed, you're demon, this and that. It looks like he's left you, so you can't even come up with any verses of the Qur'an. So these verses were revealed in response to her statement of saying that, you know what, Allah has abandoned him or something like that. Allah is making sure that he understands Allah has not abandoned you. Allah is not displeased with you. Just because a revelation is not coming down, there's a greater wisdom behind it. Doesn't mean that Allah is upset with you or something. So this report is in Bukhari and Muslim. Okay? Then you have another report narrated by Imam al-Tabari, Tabarani. So this report says the Prophet did not receive revelation for a few days, so he began to get worried. And someone, finally after a few days, they were cleaning the house of the Prophet, and they found a dead puppy underneath the bed. And then once they removed the puppy, the verses came down. So what was happening is that Jibreel was not coming to the Prophet with the new revelation that he was waiting for, because there was a dead animal inside his home. And the angel does not enter into a place where there's filth and there's, dirty things. So that's another report. So it's got to be one of these two things. It cannot be both of them simultaneously. But which report is stronger in terms of its authenticity? The one in Bukhari and Muslim. The one in Tabarani is considered to be a weak narration. So even though you have two reports, you go with the stronger report and you dismiss the weaker report. Now some of you may have come across the puppy, one, but it's weak. Technically it's weak. So, and the other one is much stronger. So sometimes you can use a weak hadith to get some contextualization of the verse, but if you have something stronger, you remove the thing that's weak and you go with the one that's stronger, especially since you cannot have two simultaneously. Okay? So I think this is a good place to pause here. Let me highlight this for myself. Okay, questions?
So in this second example, the first stronger hadith is the actual cause, and the second could be what led to that incident. Also, they could have both been correct. Right?
In which one?
In this one about what Duha, or the Surah Duha, that example. So the first one was.
So you say, is there a way to reconcile and say both of them kind of, one just happened before the other one? So it is possible. The question comes as to how much weight do you want to give to a narration of Tabarani. So when we take a class on hadith, there's another class we have on hadith 2, we're going to see how there's a classification system of varying levels of authenticity. So it depends how far this report is. If there's a liar in the chain of narration of this report, you don't even want to give it any credence. But if the reason why it's weak was because there was one guy whose name was, Amr, and he had a weak memory later on in his life, and he reported this when his memory became weak, the scholars downgraded his status, and he becomes known as weak hadith. But it doesn't mean he's like a liar. Maybe he's telling the truth. Maybe this adds context to it. So we'll talk about when we can accept that and what varying levels of hadith authenticity we have and all that stuff. Inshallah. If you guys make it to hadith class, inshallah, I'm just kidding. Inshallah, you'll do fine. So just work hard, inshallah, you make it. Any other questions? Was this class a little bit tougher than the previous two? Just checking. Yeah, it was? Okay, inshallah.
This one is the toughest I have this term.
Yeah, no, I mean this session, like this, today's class. Was it tougher than the first 2 weeks? Okay, inshallah. So that's good. So we're taking it slower. So we'll slow it down like we're doing, inshallah. Any questions?
So maybe,
You just need to. It'll take time. You're probably overloaded right now. Right? I know the feeling. So just take the time to just process it. It's like a lot of this is new, and a lot of it's probably very eye-opening, right, for a lot of people. I'm telling you, I used to do this when I was in France. I lived in the forest, so it was the coolest thing ever. I used to when I learned stuff like this, I would just go out in the forest for hours. It just took me hours to process this. But nature helps a lot, alhamdulillah. I would go in nature and process this. If you go to downtown LA and the pollution and all that, it's not going to process as well. So I recommend going to a park or something like that, just thinking about it. Yeah.
Hadith that we know that many scholars have agreed are weak, why don't we remove them? Because it causes them to be.
So the thing is, weak hadith, we're going to learn, is that there's levels of weakness, right? you don't have to have the strictest criteria on anything. Like, so for example, if your best friend comes and tells you something, right? It's not like your best friend has never made mistakes in their life. But if you have such a high threshold of criteria and say, I only take information from people who have never ever been wrong, you're not going to have any information in your life about anything. So if your threshold goes so high, you have no information about anything, right?
The ones that you know weak.
That's what I'm saying. So the thing is, if they're very, very weak, there's a range. You could say like scale, let's say scale of 1 to 10, right? So you got to put a number in there. So if you're saying anything below 3, we can say, yeah, let's remove them, right? So they are removed, and they're actually put in separate books of what's called like mawdu'at category. So these are like the ones that are like below 3. And then you got another books in different categories. So you have the rating system, and they've been sorted, but they kept them. So you're seeing remove them, meaning they've been removed. To say we don't put them in here, but we put them in this other category. So that's actually happened. Scholars have done that actually.
So would you say that these books are more for people who are practitioners
Yes.
than they are for?
The hadith books are actually more designed for people who are specifically in the field than they are for just the average person. Because there's so many chains and all that, so it's deep analysis. They're not just thrown out there. So there's some books that are designed for specialists, some books that are like Imam Bukhari, for example. Sahih Bukhari is a perfect example. A lot of people, they think Sahih Bukhari is for everyone. It's not. Sahih Bukhari wrote 2 books on hadith mainly. So he wrote one Sahih al-Bukhari, and he wrote another book called Al-Adab al-Mufrad. So Al-Adab al-Mufrad was a book that's designed for everyone. Just hand it to everyone can read it, study it. But Sahih al-Bukhari is designed for specialists. It's not designed for just the average person. So he used a lot of legal terminology and stuff like that. If you read the whole Bukhari, not the English translation that we have, but if you read the real one with all the chapter titles and commentary of Bukhari, you'll be like, if you don't know your subject, your background, Islamic law, you'll not understand what he's saying, right? So, because it's a specialist book. It's like a book on medicine. You know, you take a book on medicine, 4th year medical school, and you give it to someone who's a computer science major. He's not gonna understand. You know, so it's not gonna work.
I can see that there are some weak hadiths that have good logical reasoning,
Right.
which you could use in.
Absolutely, because they may not be weak.
Yeah.
You know, they may be true. Someone's memory got messed up along the way, but doesn't mean that the Prophet didn't say it. All right, inshallah. May Allah give you success in this endeavor. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك الله ونتوب إليك. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
Good.